Alright guys, so now that we've solved basic equations, we're going to talk about modeling with linear equations, aka word problems. And this does show up on the Hawk, so it's very important that we go over this stuff. So just some problem solving steps that I would talk about would be, number one, you read the problem carefully, determining what you are asked to find, write down what is known in the situation, draw and label a diagram of the problem if necessary. Number two, define the variable with a let statement you wish to use. Number three, write an equation with your variable to model the problem. Number four, solve your equation. What I would do, you can follow those general steps, but I'll kind of explain how to solve most of these problems, and these are the problems that you're going to see generally on the Hawks. So, example number one says two brothers, Mark and Brian, each inherit $38,000. Mark invests his inheritance in a savings account with an annual return of 2.2%, while Brian invests his inheritance in a CD paying 5.1% annually. How much more money than Mark does Brian have after 1 year? So what we're trying to find is how much more money than Mark does Brian have after 1 year. So what we first need to do is find out how much money they both have individually after 1 year. So for Mark's, okay, I'm going to take that 38,000. I'm going to multiply it by 1 plus, I need to take my percentage and convert it to a decimal. So when you do that, I would add the 0.022 to the 1 and then multiply by my 38,000. I get 38,836. If you think about it, if you're investing money, you should end up with more money than what you started with. So that makes sense, right? Brian is very similar, except for now, instead of using 0.022 because of the 2.2%, I'm going to use 5.1%. So 38,000 times 1 plus 0.051. Okay, so again, we would do the math behind that. You get 39,938. And here's the thing. Mark made $38,836. Brian made $39,938. It wants to know how much more money than Mark does Brian have. So what you have to do is you take the amount of money they got after their 1 year for both of them, and I'm going to subtract them to figure out how much more money Brian got than Mark. And Brian should have got more money because he got a better interest rate. So the answer to this problem would be $1,102. Because again, Brian had the better interest. All right. Number two, it says find three consecutive. Consecutive means like in a row. So like an example would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Integers whose sum is 366. So the easiest way to do this is you take the number and you divide it by 3, because there's going to be 3 numbers, right? So when you do that, you get 122. Well, that 122 is going to be your middle number, right? Now, 1 less than 122 would be 121. 1 more would be 123. So that should be my 3 consecutive integers. I can always add them and make sure, because it says whose sum is 366, I can add them together to see if I get 366, and I do. So that means it works out. All right, just be careful on the Hawks. I know instead of saying 3 consecutive integers, they're going to say like 3 consecutive even integers. So it has to be even numbers. All right, so like 121 is not an even number, but 120 would be. All right, and 123 is not an even number, but 124 would be. So you just have to make sure you read the instructions, because it's going to tell you if it's even, odd, or consecutive, and it does matter. But you can always check it. You're still, the setup's the same. You're still going to divide that number by 3. That's your middle number, and then you got to find the other 2. All right, if it says consecutive, I'm just going to subtract 1 and add 1. If it says even and odd, all right, I'm going to subtract 2 and add 2. Just kind of depends on the problem. All right. Next one, it says 2 trucks leave a warehouse at the same time. One travels due north at an average speed of 58 miles per hour, and the other travels due south at an average speed of 64 miles per hour. After how many hours will the 2 trucks be 427 miles apart? Well, if you think about it, they're both going opposite directions, right? So the first truck is going 58 miles per hour. We don't know the hours. The second truck is going 64 miles an hour. And we're going to add them because if they're going in opposite directions, they're getting further apart, so we can add their distances. And then what do we want it to equal? How far apart do we want it to be? We want it to be 427 miles. So I'm going to take that 58 plus that 64, and I'm going to get 122x equal to my 427. I'm going to divide by 122. And I get 3.5 hours. So after 3.5 hours, they're going to be 427 miles apart. Again, you can always check it. I could take that 58 times 3.5 and add it to the 64 times 3.5, and I should get 427 miles. All right. Moving on. I wouldn't say this is a hard problem. The hardest part about it, though, is just the wording of it. So it says, Kurt decides to leave an 11% tip after eating dinner at Sun Bistro. If the bill is $15.28, how much should he pay? Round to the nearest, and that should say cent. All right, so how much should he pay means the tip plus the bill. All right, so how much should he pay should be tip plus the bill. So first thing we want to do is we want to find the tip. So I'm going to take that 1528 times, I'm going to make the percentage a decimal, so 15.28 times 0.11. So the tip is $1.68. But now, in order to find how much should he pay, I need to take 1528 plus my tip. And you get $16.96. Which makes sense. If you're going out to a restaurant, right, you're going to pay a little over the bill because you want to include the tip and the bill. All right. So that's the word problems that you're going to see, but they are going to throw this at you as well. They're going to say solving for variables. So sometimes it's necessary to isolate a variable, aka a letter. This is done when finding inverses and can come in handy as we begin to solve equations. So solve the formula below for h. All right. Guys, if you ever see a fraction, in order to get rid of the fraction, I need to multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. So the first thing I would do is I'd multiply by 2 over 1, aka 2, on both sides. So now I'm going to have 2a equals, that's going to cancel out. I'm going to have b plus b times h. If I want to solve for h, right, I'm taking that b plus b and I'm multiplying by the h. So the opposite of multiplying would be to divide it. So you can divide the whole thing. So I would get h is equal to 2a over b plus b. All right. So that's one of the harder ones, but it is nice to see that you can divide by the whole thing instead of just individual parts. I would not distribute because you're solving for a letter, so you're kind of doing the opposite thing. Instead of distributing, you're going to get rid of it. So next one, again, there's a fraction, so I would multiply by the reciprocal to get rid of it. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 9/5. So I'm going to get 9/5 c equals, because there's nothing else left, I'm going to say f minus 32. So now if I'm solving for f, the only thing I need to do is to add the 32 to both sides. So I'm going to get 9/5 c plus 32 equals f. All right. C is pretty easy. I kind of encourage you to pause it and try it on your own. It says solve the following for r. So c equals 2 pi r. Well, think about what they're doing there with the 2, the pi, and the r. Well, they're multiplying. So the opposite of multiplying would be to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2 pi. You're going to get c over 2 pi equals r. All right. And last one, I did this one right here because you see it on the Hawks and it kind of scares people. All right, this is one whole thing. All right, so it's v initial is what we like to call that, v initial squared. So in order to get rid of it, I need to subtract it first. Don't try and square it. So I'm going to say v squared equals v initial squared, or v squared minus v initial squared equals 2ax. If I'm solving for a, again, we're multiplying. It's kind of like the one above. So I'm going to divide by the 2 and the x. And I'm going to get a equals v squared minus v initial squared over 2x. All right. So that is the whole lesson. It's kind of not really a whole lot of complicated math, but the hard part is setting up the equations and then making sure you're solving them correctly when you're solving for a variable. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Your homework is going to be 1.5b, Hawk's assignment. Again, if you have any questions over that, please reach out. All right, have a good day, guys.